Hi everyone, welcome back to Dropping Facts with Dr. Jax and Nurse Millian P, who's my amazing sidekick. We're discussing that it was not going to be wingman, it was going to be my extra wing, my other wing, the other side of it.
I love that.
Yeah, so we're lifting each other up, we're holding each other accountable. Okay, what are we talking about today, ma'am?
Today we are talking about how hormones such as estrogen and progesterone specifically play a role as neuroprotective. There's neuroprotective properties with these hormones.
Mm-hmm. I was fascinated by that little tidbit. So we just came back, we went together to this A4M, which is the American Academy for Anti-Aging. Phenomenal group. Like they're really, really great. Wonderful speakers. I always learn something. I think I took like 20 pages of notes.
Yeah.
It was nuts. Yeah.
Me too.
And one of the first things that one of the lecturers was alluding to is that when you have a traumatic brain injury, the brain itself actually starts forming estrogen. That blew me away.
Yeah.
I was like, are you kidding? Because I think we're so narrowly taught. And sure, when you're going through your medical education, you have to start somewhere, right? You have to start with the basics. Yes, this is the thing. But as you get into the nuances of our biochemistry and how our body is so intricately interlaced, like it's really so integral, and there's so many backup systems, right? So there's so many ways that it can correct itself. When we think about 70% of our brain mass is cholesterol, right, by weight, and then our sex hormones are made from cholesterol. And so it made sense when she made that point that when you have a traumatic brain injury, that we start to form estrogen at the site of the injury. I was like, well, that makes sense. Like, why wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Even though we think about only the ovaries or testes or adrenal glands kind of producing these hormones. But they are actually made elsewhere in the body. Also that there's receptors for these hormones everywhere. Every tissue type has these receptors. So they are not little entities by any means. So then Amelia and I did some reading for you so you don't have to.
Yes.
And we were looking at the neuroprotective benefits of sex hormones, primarily estrogen and progesterone. We're kind of digging into this here a little bit. And it's fascinating stuff. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the articles we actually read, we should maybe share.
We share, and we'll link it below.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So the first one is estrogen anti-inflammatory activity in the brain, a therapeutic opportunity for menopause and neurodegenerative diseases. And the second one we're referring to is progesterone for the treatment of central nervous system disorders, the many signaling roads for a single molecule. So specifically estrogen and progesterone here. And so one of the takeaways for me was like, the receptors. Oh my God, we have receptors in our brain, which means there's a purpose in the brain. And so those purposes are more than just, as we talk about all the time, mood, things like that, but for the inflammatory pathway and different cascades based on inflammation.
Yes.
And
so we talk a lot in the brain about myelination, which is like this little protective sheath. It's like this little fatty sheath around the neurons, particularly the dendrites, which are the little, right? That's it. The dendrites or the axons?
I think it's axons, but
the axons.
It's
so the
signaling.
Axons are the little arms that reach out to the next neuron, and then they kind of pick up over the synapse. And so we have these myelin sheaths around those axons. And I always think about like omega-9s, plasmalogens for that, certain good fats. But then understanding that estrogen plays a role in that, as well as progesterone. For remyelinating. Like, so we can repair neurons. Like, this is so groundbreaking because, again, in medical school, and remember, I went to medical school back when the dinosaurs were still my classmates. We had a little brontosaurus sitting in the second row. So great. 150 years ago, 1999, I started. But in that time, we understood that if you had a traumatic brain injury, if you had a stroke, there was very minimal benefit. Yes, go to therapy, but you're probably not going to have a huge regain of function. We knew kids had more plasticity in their brains than adults. We still know that that's true. But it was kind of this understanding that you couldn't repair neurologic injury.
Yeah, they said in school, when I was in school, you cannot regrow neurons. Those are the cells that will not regrow.
That's it, they're done.
So that was like 2011.
Yeah.
So it was still being taught.
Yes. And then by the time we ended medical school, they're like, well, there's kind of some promising studies. You can maybe regenerate some neurons, but it's like watching snails race. Like, it's so slow.
Yeah.
When we look at normal tissue turnover time, you're looking at 45 days max. guys, think about getting a paper cut. Like immediate, just within an hour or two, you're starting to form that little eschar. It's clotted off. It's not bleeding anymore. It's starting to rebuild that matrix. And then skin edges will close back together within 24 hours. I mean, we're amazing organisms.
Yes.
Right? We're designed for this kind of thing. But neurologic injury, it's going to take you a good 6 months to a year to really see some of that regenerative benefit. So it is very insidious. It's very slow.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that as you're sort of using some of these tools that we're providing for you, that you're maybe considering like, what are the expectations that a patient has? So I just had a patient not too long ago. She's 75 years old, early cognitive decline. And she's like, I want you to help me. I'm like, yes.
Yeah, I got you.
So we talked about the things, and she did like 3 sessions of ozone. And she's like, it doesn't work. I didn't notice any benefit. I still can't find my keys. Okay, and then she did like methylene blue for 2 weeks. And she says, yep, I still can't remember what I had for breakfast, so it didn't work, so I stopped it. And I'm like, whoa, okay, we're gonna have to talk about what the expectations are about actual, perceived benefit, actual benefit. What is your mini mental status? And again, timeline. How soon are you gonna see that?
Yeah.
Because even with hormone replacement therapy for just vasomotor symptoms, which can be significantly life-altering, but we'll say just for that symptom alone, you're looking at 4 to 6 weeks of therapy before you see a benefit. Mixed literature, though, on the end of like NAM's recommendation for hormone replacement therapy for neurodegenerative ailments. What are neurodegenerative ailments? What are we talking about?
So we're talking about like dementia, multiple sclerosis, as we refer to, even traumatic brain injury, stroke, even like viral illnesses, guys.
Yes.
Like that can actually turn on the microglials. Yep. And so the immune system of the brain is going to come in and try to repair, as it should.
Yep. But if it doesn't shut down,
it doesn't usually turn off.
It won't turn off, and will do collateral damage.
Yes, and that's the process, and that's why it's so hard because you want to slow down that process. So when we're dealing with the patient you just referred to, it's hopefully we can reverse that, but at the very least we will prevent it from worsening.
Yes.
So that's the very realistic expectations we have to give, and anything beyond preventing it from worsening is bonus, right?
Yes.
So we have to have that expectation, because the brain, the immune system of the brain is really to protect us. We want to have a balance of autophagy. So the brain's going to clean up any dead neurons, anything that's causing plaques, for example, those amyloid plaques. We want that immune system to come in, but we don't want it to come in and eat the good cells and continue to eat those good cells. So that's the balance. And that's where the estrogen and progesterone actually come in with that balance.
And they immune modulate.
Important. Yes.
And this was a great conversation I just had with one of our very near and dear patients. We're going to do a case study on her eventually, the one with the kidney disease. And we talked very significantly about immune modulation. And I think when we're looking at the inflammatory cascade, tissue repair from injury, again, whether it's amyloid plaquing with, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's, chorea, if we're talking about the plaques formed by multiple sclerosis, even ALS, although again, that is a whole different animal. It's really precarious to treat those ailments. But if we look at it from a standpoint of inflammation kind of gone out of control, immune response not being appropriate, and now then being able to immune modulate. So we want to build immune function, like boost up that immune system and response where it's lacking, and we want to suppress it where it's overactive and destructive. And when we can look at disease processes from that immune versus inflammatory interplay, I think we'll have a different perspective than just, is it a genetic predisposition? What are the epigenetics? What are our forever chemicals? I think those things are all important, but if we're really looking at how we're balancing TH1, TH2, cytokine response for pro-inflammatory versus pro-building.
Yes. So
inflammation is not always bad.
Right.
It's bad when it becomes destructive to collateral tissues. Inflammation in the initial forms is for repair. It's a cell signaling to say, I need to be fixed, help send recruits. So then the little army comes in and starts to repair But if we have the army come in and also knock down your door, break your windows, and put your house on fire, well, thank you for protecting me from the burglars, but you messed my house
exactly.
up. So we have to have that ability to immune modulate. And that's the balance that I think a lot of these studies, when they say unequivocally, like, oh, it's not helpful, oh, we don't see a benefit. Okay, well, how much are you using? How often? Is it maybe a super therapeutic dose that we're needing? So looking at progesterone, because that's what I left off on, but I know you were more comfortable with the estrogen portion of it, so just kind of read this stuff and try to figure out how to best come forward with it. They were saying with the progesterone, it's really promising in preclinical animal trials.
Oh, yeah.
Animals that they had kind of knocked out the progesterone receptor, then they give them progesterone, they give them a neurologic injury. It's terrible, but we got to study it somehow. So then they're noticing that they're not having a good benefit from progesterone, but the wild type or the natural mice, they do well with progesterone. But then when we implement it in kind of human studies, it's maybe not crossing the blood-brain barrier. We're not seeing that benefit. But when I prescribe progesterone, like, how much do you typically give?
100 milligrams.
Yeah, about 100 milligrams, right?
Progesterone.
Progesterone.
That's another nuance.
Not progestins.
Yeah.
So were they doing the human trials with progestin, like medroxyprogesterone, which is not progesterone? It's actually a modified progesterone, so it becomes a progestin. Are they using other progestins that are synthetic and maybe interfering with those receptors abnormally and doing abnormal pro-inflammatory signals? Are we not using enough?
Yep. The dose.
Is the route of administration different? Should we be doing it intranasal? Should it be a spray? Should it be injected?
Or cream,
intrathecal? Like, I don't know. Should we be giving these like similar to an epidural? I don't know the answer to that. Or should we be doing maybe 450 milligrams, like 4 divided doses of 100 milligrams every day?
Right.
I don't know.
And for how long?
And for how long? Do you need a break? Should you do it cyclically? Should we be following serum levels? These are all questions that I think the literature is lacking. And this is where, when you're discussing these things with a provider who's maybe not as curious or discerning or as familiar with it, they're like, no, there's no studies that support that. No, it's not been shown to help. Okay, well, it's not untrue, I guess, but it's also not the whole answer.
Yeah.
Because I think there's still like stones that we haven't turned over yet. There's a lot of unanswered questions, and every time I'm reading one of these studies, I have like 6 more questions. I just don't have the funding or the organizational skills to answer those questions.
So anybody wants to fund, let us know. We have lots of ideas.
A ton of ideas. Like, it's so exciting because when you start to think about this thing, okay, in theory, this thing should work, but then it doesn't. Then I ask why. It doesn't make sense for an endogenous steroid, which should be naturally anti-inflammatory and naturally cellular repairing and building, so our little Bob the Builders. Why is it not working?
Yeah.
And so it tells me that it's probably a dosing effect or a route of administration effect. It's a bioavailability effect. So what is it being attached to that it's maybe not getting through? Is this something that maybe for exosome, like targeted exosome therapy, there's been a lot of chemotherapeutic agents that they're using for like glioblastomas and so forth. That are using exosomes, and they're attaching this chemotherapeutic pharmaceutical to these exosomes because they will cross the blood-brain barrier.
Interesting.
Could we do that with progesterone? I don't know. And
Possibly.
Again, what person is out there, and are they using natural progesterone instead of a progestin? Because those cellular effects are vastly different in vivo. So that's the thing. Just because it's sort of progest in the name doesn't make
it's
it
actually not the progesterone. It's not the same. Yeah, and I think that's a huge point too when we're thinking about did it work or not, right? So now not only do we have all that, we have case dependent. So it could be a challenge to create a study where you have a control group and not, because everybody has a different reason for these things to occur. So there's studies that show viruses cause multiple sclerosis. Like there's certain viruses that are linked to certain conditions.
Yep.
Progesterone and estrogen are going to come in with that anti-inflammatory effect, but that's not the whole picture. What is their diet? What is their lifestyle? Because we know all those things play a role in overall inflammation, and so that's where it can be tricky too. And so we don't really want to jump and say, oh, it didn't work.
Yeah.
did we address everything else first?
Yeah. Was everybody on the same exercise regimen? Was everybody having the same viral exposure that led to the same thing? Did they have the same number of plaques, right? This person has 6 lesions,
and
that
that's
person
where
has 20.
it's so confusing.
This person has mobility issues, but this one has cognition issues.
Yeah.
And if we look at a lot of these autoimmune processes as well, I think across the board, way more prevalent in women than men.
Oh, and dementia too. And it has to do with the estrogen. So interesting fact that you might know this though, but men produce more estrogen in their brain than women do.
That's wild.
And especially post-menopause.
Right, because men don't need estrogen, right? Men don't need estrogen. This is what we're always taught. We're always told this, guys. It's a very basic way of looking at it.
And so there's a theory that is why women are more likely to get dementia than men. It has to do with that estrogen decrease and the fact that we don't produce it in our brain as much. I want to say it's like, I don't know if it's 10%, don't quote me, but like a very low percent of our estrogen is created in our brain.
Yeah.
Compared to a man would be like 25%. If we're just going to compare like that, it's
yeah,
pretty significant.
They're not peripherally producing, so they're probably producing at the site.
Like locally.
And they're not having that dropout, right?
Yeah.
Like we go through with menopause. They just aren't. Men are designed to procreate until the day they die. Benjamin Franklin was having kids well into his 70s. You can argue about that and his relationship with Sarah, whatever her last name was, one of his slaves, and all of this kind of thing. Whether it was a mutual relationship. Let's get into it. But
yeah, in the comments, let us know.
Yeah, let us know. But men are designed to have those elevated testosterone levels. Testosterone aromatizes into estrogen and estradiol. And we know that those men who have better levels of these actually have better cardioprotective benefits, better blood pressure, better lipid profiles, and better brain function. And yet women are going through lupus and fibromyalgia and rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis, way more prevalent in women than in
all
men.
autoimmune disease.
And it's fascinating. Now, I don't know about Parkinson's. I feel like Parkinson's and Huntington has a more male predominance.
Yes. I'm not sure why though.
Put it in the comments. Like, I don't remember a second year medical
I think,
school,
a chromosome thing. I don't know.
I think it has to do. I know that it's like Huntington's is autosomal dominant. It's autosomal, not sex linked, but definitely more prevalent in men. Interesting. No, it's fascinating stuff. And so I think if we can remember that these hormones have an immune modulatory effect, a neuromodulatory effect, and we're not talking about just cognition, but also neuropathic pain receptors. So again, you actually have an injury, but how the nerves then respond to it. Also mood. So depression, anxiety.
We'll do a whole talk on that.
That's a whole different animal, but it's still neurologic, having to do with this little organ that lives inside the skull. And so I think we tend to separate psychology from neurodegenerative or cognitive, but it really is all on the same spectrum. It's just different areas of the brain that are affected.
Exactly.
So you get a different outcome.
Neuroinflammation overall.
Yeah, just in general. So fascinating stuff. Okay, did we get all the stuff? I think we got all the things. Yeah. We put a little... we want a cheat sheet over here because we have to stay on track. Otherwise, I'm going to talk about kids and what's for dinner and all the other things. But yeah, no, I hope you find this helpful. These are such important topics. If there's something you want us to discuss, we're always happy to research new things, kind of variations on a theme, if you will.
Yeah, definitely.
Let us know down below. If you haven't, like, subscribe, share. We want to get our channel out there. We want to be able to educate folks in the wild and make sure people are being able to take care of their best health.
Thank you.